Welcome. Thanks a lot, everyone. That's nice and friendly from this audience. And that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about, where it starts is the shift from investment, speculation, to where Bitcoin really is today, sort of a main player character energy around changing financial systems and the talk of the town when it comes to institutional investors. And a lot of this shift really started, I would say, at this event last year. If you remember all the rumors around this event last year, and Omar, you're a local, so I'll turn to you first for this. How much of a change was it when we saw the sovereign wealth funds last year, just after this event, announce that they were acquiring Bitcoin? What did it do to the narrative here and what you've perceived abroad?
I think it was a very big movement, or a very big shift, at least in thinking. Obviously, we are an oil-producing country, so people would not have expected us to be doing that. But in reality, we are in the forefront of adopting Bitcoin. And I personally think it's something very important, especially for the sovereignty of our country. In a post-oil era, I think Bitcoin is going to be a very important energy factor and a very important aspect for our sovereignty as a country. So I think after we've announced that the UAE has been buying and holding a lot of Bitcoin, I think there's a lot of shift that's happened, especially in the region. I know a lot of places around the world, they've already been adopting that, and they've already been thinking about it, and they've already took steps. But for us as an oil-producing country to be so bold in doing that, I think that made a big shift in a lot of people's thinkings. And you can see that by all the big sovereign wealth funds and the BlackRocks and the Blackstones and all these guys. So I think for us, it was pivotal, and it was very important for the world to see that we're doing this. So, yeah. Thank you, Bitcoin Mina.
Yeah, it's happening. It's happening. Bill, well, there we go. People are excited. Bill, we were talking backstage. You had been living in Beijing, but you moved to this area. And that's what I'm seeing with this energy and sovereignty, right? It's one of the reasons why America seems to be in the grip of a Bitcoin fever. And we're seeing it here in the UAE too. In many ways, UAE and USA are really leading this institutional narrative. So what brought you to this area? Is it that this institutional narrative has already laid the groundwork and it allows you to really make these connections?
Yeah, well, definitely. I think if we see US is a sort of a center of global crypto, UAE is definitely one of the most important crypto corridor in a sense, especially in the international center outside of US. And when I moved here along with my ex-boss CZ, 4 years ago, by then I was a global head of M&A for Binance. And we want to find a place, where it's very friendly to crypto community, but also, with a sophisticated regulation. So that's, part of the reason 4 years ago, I moved here along with CZ. And, I think today we saw Binance has a great news that, they're going to be licensed in Abu Dhabi, especially, for the global Bitcoin Binance.com. This is, very epic because it's not Binance regional, but it's a Binance.com. And the second story I want to share is, by 2022, when I left Binance and want to, join my own venture initiative, me and along with two of my partners, we set up the first ever UAE sovereign Bitcoin miner in Abu Dhabi, in the downtown on the opposite of the Rosewood Hotel. And if you check, UAE globally, how many Bitcoin UAE sovereign own today is around, 7,000. And that is, under our group's custody with the honor. So I want to say, basically 2021, the UAE government accept the Binance team, and also help Binance to be regulated. And by 2022, they set up the first sovereign Bitcoin miner. And today, they began to regulate the Binance globally here. So I think, this is, sort of the degree the UAE, they can be a very perfect balance between nimble and, startup friendly as possible, but also without sacrifice the sophistication as a regulator.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the very predictable regulatory environment has been a big help in this area. And, in many ways, America sort of embraced Bitcoin and then did the regulation after, versus here where they really did get the regulation right and allow things to come through an attractive sort of force after, correct?
Yeah, predictable is very important.
Yeah, yeah. Now, Alexandre, you can see in a lot of sense that there is a certain regionality, let's say, to this institutional narrative. And You're just like Bill, you made the move down to this part of the world, you left Europe, came down here, obviously found what we've just heard from Omar, this really vibrant narrative that's going on. But, back where you came from in Europe, where is the narrative over there? I know they're getting the regulations, but everyone's kind of like, who cares? What's going on over in Europe? Are they really seeing it the same way as America and UAE? Are they near to seeing it? Where are they at?
Well, 2025 has been year one of institutional curiosity for Europe. At the beginning, the institutions were not paying attention. It was really Donald Trump's strategic reserve that made the click for many institutions that were listening to Bitcoin for years and thought that it was too risky for them. And then suddenly, it became too risky to at least not be curious about it from a management and professional career standpoint within the banks. And so when we started Capital B, in fact, 1 year ago, back at the last Bitcoin MENA conference, we had 3-4 institutions at the beginning within the capitalization table. Now it's 40-50 institutions, and many of them Europeans. But 90% of the capital that we've raised is still from international institutions outside of France itself. And really recently, after the big rise of the Bitcoin Treasury companies and then the drawdown in the price, still Capital B is up by 7x since the launch of the strategy. But now the institutions are realizing, oh, I missed the last run, the first leg of adoption. And maybe I will try to now look into this, understand what it is. And for the first time in the last month, I've had 70 meetings with institutions in France, specifically. Some of the largest independent banks and some of the largest systemic banks over in Europe, and some of the presidents of those banks. And they are now fully sold on the monetary devaluation. This is not a debate anymore. It's exponential money creation. And they see Bitcoin as the only way to get the attention of their clientele. They are losing the attention of their young clientele. They are losing the attention of their professional clientele. And they see Bitcoin as a potential way to continue to engage their clientele in that way. And so while Bitcoin is still very small within the financial system, it's taking a lot of attention. Why? Because the best performing individuals have been Bitcoiners, the best performing corporations have been Bitcoin corporations, and now the best sovereigns are looking into this, and that's also part of why we have decided to set up a subsidiary in Abu Dhabi, in ADGM, because there is this vision, there is this conviction on scarce resources and how to use them for the future, and that's a vision that we share very much.
And you mentioned sovereignty and attention and how that vision of energy and resources that are finite move in the future. And it does remind me, we've had in the past 2 weeks, the 2 largest companies in the world. We had Jensen Huang just 2 nights ago talk about how energy and Bitcoin are fused and tied at the hip. Just 1 week before that, we had Elon Musk say it. So that's 2 of the largest corporations on earth, the most interesting, main player character energy again, main stage type of folks and companies. And you see, like you said, Omar, about the sovereignty and energy being a big component of this, the finite resources and sovereignty being fused at the hip. So when you see this argument from Jensen Huang about energy and Bitcoin and Elon Musk, how much easier, again, does that make your job here in this area, that everyone is now understanding the sovereignty question, the strategic reserve question, with not just the President of the United States, not just the leaders of UAE, but also the 2 largest companies in the world coming around and all sort of rhyming with each other. So how much easier does that make your job?
Honestly, Nolan, I'm glad that they started listening. It's like 10 years too late.
You've been doing this for a long time.
We've been doing this for a long time. We've been called crazy for a long time. I'm glad to see everybody's become as crazy as we are, let's say, in terms of adoption. But I'm so glad that the country has decided to take that step. It was very challenging in the beginning. But I think right now that debate is off the table. It's now more about how do we acquire more Bitcoin? How do we make sure this industry is attracted correctly? How do we regulate it correctly? So I think we're on the right path, and a lot of people I think also see that. As you can see, we have two great companies that have just moved here. We have hundreds of them that are moving every year. I think the vision that Abu Dhabi has, and the UAE specifically, of how to adopt this whole crypto industry, Bitcoin being the forefront of that. I think we're on the forefront of all that, and a lot of business leaders also agree with that, and that's why we have them here. So it's becoming easier.
And I like what you said, it's about acquiring more Bitcoin, because that reminds me, there's this idea of moving past the sale in sales, right? Moving past the sale. The most famous example was Donald Trump used it with the wall in Mexico. It wasn't build the wall, yes or no, it was who's going to pay for the wall. You were already the wall was already getting built, who's going to pay for it? And it feels like, and Alexandre, I think you're the perfect person for this, because I want to know how much is still, when you're dealing with people who are just getting their first taste of Bitcoin and what's going on, are we still in the world of educating people about Bitcoin? Do you want to buy Bitcoin? Or have we really gone to where we hear the BlackRocks? Is it 5% or it's 1% or 5% or 10%? Because when you're saying about how much Bitcoin you're going to buy, you're not really selling people on buying Bitcoin yes or no. You're asking them how much they're already going to buy it. So how much? Are we past the point of having to sell Bitcoin? Or are we still having to sell Bitcoin and not about how much?
Well, there was a point mainly last year where you still had to talk about whether Bitcoin is good or bad. And that is a very inappropriate question. The question is whether it works or not. And today, there is an admission by the large financial institutions in the world that Bitcoin works and that Bitcoin is here to stay, and that at the very least, as you mentioned, it is a diversification factor for the largest financial institutions. And so in that respect, the market size of Bitcoin has been really a few $1 trillion that's been allocated yet in the global economy. The size of capital is $1 quadrillion, and there will be a lot of frictions along the way as Bitcoin is integrating all of these different tools to enter capital markets. The first one has been equity that is backed by Bitcoin. The second one is becoming digital credit that is backed by Bitcoin. And you can see systemic banks, the JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, even players that were hostile to Bitcoin, Vanguard, now accepting Bitcoin and giving access to it, structuring products for it. And then on the other side, you see Bitcoin treasury companies taking the Bitcoin on the balance sheet and using that as a machine to provide Bitcoin per share to their shareholders and transform USD yield that is provided to traditional markets into BTC yield in the form of additional Bitcoin per share. And for the president of the largest systemic bank in France, for example, it came down to two questions that made him realize that Bitcoin was going to be a priority for him over the next year. It was whether Bitcoin is secure and decentralized. All of the questions around Bitcoin can go towards whether Bitcoin is secure and decentralized. And if you realize that it is the case, and you can monitor that aspect over time, then you realize that you need to build and to work for Bitcoin, because that will reward you over time. And so, for example, Capital B is still a small company in the grand scheme of things in France. It's 200 million euros of capitalization, yet it is in the top 5 daily of the stocks that are the most discussed in France. It is the #1 volumes in the Euronext Growth Paris stock exchange. And so you see, when I meet with the bankers and they tell me, what about Bitcoin? I tell them, look, this is the most liquid stock that you have with your retail clientele. It represents already 1 billion of volumes. And this is more important to them than the theoretical aspect. And so then the question remains how to gain access to Bitcoin and how to provide more options for my clientele. And so that is really changing. And you can see that in France more recently. There's been a systemic bank now offering retail access to Bitcoin. That was not happening last year. And so Already you have 450 Bitcoin mined every day. That's the offer in the market. And then you have 1,300 buying pressure every day in the market from Bitcoin treasury companies. And then 1,300 again from funds, ETFs, and now the sovereign wealth funds. So this is accelerating. And while the market is moving hands, changing hands in terms of Bitcoin ownership, you can see that the trend is really accelerating. And while the amounts are not still that significant from a global perspective, you see Abu Dhabi is about $500 million of allocation. This will grow to billions of dollars. And so you better be ready before that happens than after.
And you were talking about optionality and the different capital market products. You know, at Roxom, we believe in Bitcoin-denominated, Bitcoin-backed capital markets. That's what we think the narrative is going to be going forward. Bill, what are you thinking the narrative is going to be in 2026 along this institutional line? Is it like what Alexandre was saying, these optionalities, these different solutions, how to access Bitcoin, this vehicle, that vehicle? What do you see being the main plank of narrative building in institutional adoption in 2026?
Well, I think in general, if we are getting to expected low interest rate environment in 2026, and definitely, Bitcoin along with the gold and the risky assets should be, part of the most important asset allocation to, bet against the low interest rate. And regarding the narrative, I think now the key issue is not about whether there are some narrative or not. I think Bitcoin is getting into a silent IPO moment where people begin to buy in the narrative. This is digital gold with 21 million fixed supply, and going forward, everyone should own a piece of it. The only issue would be like how much you want to own it, and for how long of the period of the time you want to average your cost to acquire your Bitcoin to some certain percentage. And I think that's part of the reason, why in past 1 year, Bitcoin is kind of, in the sideline with more institutional adoption, but, the price is sideline. And I think, there is a significant turnover between, the previous holder and the new investor. So I do think, going forward, it's more about, the massive adoption of the mindset in a sense. Yeah, so for the individual and for the institution, people begin to, buy Bitcoin, as part of the allocation.
Well, I love it. It makes sense when you think of it in those terms, and I especially see it in terms of, even geopolitical peace, for example. We saw United States and the president come over here. It's not just their idea of how to structure the economy. It looks like fundamentally America is starting to prefer the real economy of producers and energy makers, and you can see why the UAE and the USA are starting to really sing from the same songbook. So, looking forward in 2026, where do you see these American and UAE type narratives taking the industry? Omar.
Honestly, I'm hoping that we're going to be having a big share of the whole mining across the globe. I hope. At least this is part of our strategy. At least I don't know how successful we're going to be in it, but I hope we will be. But I think we want to be able to control a certain part of that hash rate. It makes sense that we're an oil-producing country in the sense that we're doing it here. But also a lot of this is going to be happening in North America. There's going to be 7 gigawatts of energy coming online this year, just in North America. I think a big part of that is going to be focused on data centers. And a big part of those data centers would be Bitcoin mining. So I hope, at least us sovereignly, that we're going to be having a big chunk of that. And that's part of our strategy as well.
Well, in some ways, people say anyway that Bitcoin mining has put the AI finance model ahead by about 10 years because of ASICs and then co-location and basically the anchor tenant real estate development model.
Yeah.
Bitcoin really perfected that, and you see AI slipping in on that whole same conversation and learning from what the Bitmains have already done and all these folks. So last question here for you, Alexandre. We've only got a minute to make sure you get to your other stage talk where you'll be with all kinds of interesting people. So just a last bit on that, on the energy front and the energy finance, and whether or not, going back to your European perspective, if they're finally going to click for them on this energy finance narrative.
Well, we are very far from this over in Europe. I think a lot of Europe, at least regulatory wise, is still stuck within the good or bad, while the rest of the world is within the working or not. I think this story is not new. It seems like we are discovering how scarcity works and what will be the industry that will be built upon Bitcoin, but in reality, this is not new. There was two private companies that were founded back in the 1800s and 1900s in England and in France with the objective to accumulate gold. And those two companies became the Bank of England and the Bank of France. So I guess that if you want to become the global reserve of the world, you want to accumulate the scarcest asset on earth, and then you will build financial services on top of it, you will build infrastructure, energy services on top of it, and you will build the whole economy on top of it. And so this is the global and the long-term vision of a Bitcoin treasury company. It is not a meme stock that you could have the impression of on the internet. It is literally the foundation for who will have the most Bitcoin and who will be able to maximize what it is able to do around it. Because the use case of Bitcoin is, yes, it's peer-to-peer cash electronic system with absolute scarcity. So it is individual sovereignty.
Absolute scarcity applies to Bitcoin, but also the time on the clock. So time is also scarce. And we're out of it, unfortunately. Thank you, Alexandre. Thank you, Omar. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Warm round of applause for these fellas. Thanks a lot, everyone.